Winston Churchill famously called democracy the worst form of government in the world, except for all the others. Or is it? Have citizens actually experienced the best government they could have? Have their interests been well served by the one person, one vote model that's been revered for much of the 20th century? Political theorist Jason Brennan doubts that, and his new book, Against Democracy, lays out the case. Jason Brennan is professor of strategy, economics, ethics, and public policy at Georgetown University, and he joins us now from Washington, D.C. Professor Brennan, it's good to have you on the program. How are you tonight?
I'm well. How are you?
Terrific, thank you. Well, let's get into this. The fundamental flaw in democracy is one person, one vote. Let's get into it. How come?
Well, the democracy creates a problem. It has some benefits and it has some problems. The benefit of spreading power out so widely rather than concentrating in the hands of the few is that we remove the incentive for people to use the power selfishly for their own personal ends at the expense of everyone else. And that's a nice thing. But the downside of it is that when you give people so little power, so little stake, and you make power so widespread, individual votes don't really make any difference anymore, and so people have no incentive to use it wisely. So imagine you're, say, at the University of Toronto taking a large 1,000-person class, and your professor announces at the beginning of the semester, I'm going to give you a final exam in 3 months. It's going to count for your entire grade, but rather than you getting your own grade, I'm going to average all of your grades together, and you'll all get the same grade. Well, we wouldn't expect anybody to study, and the average grade would be an F. In effect, that's how democracy works. Voters don't really know much of anything. When we study what they know basically nothing. And the result of that is that they push for politicians that have bad ideas, and we get subpar government as a result.
Well, let me push back a bit on this. I do remember in the year 2000, George W. Bush winning Florida by 536 or 7 votes. Seems to me that every single vote was pretty important in that case, no?
No, I don't really think so. So if when we try to calculate what's the probability that a vote will be decisive, going into the year 2000 election ahead of time, based upon how far people were leaning one way or another, the chances that even a Floridian's vote would have been decisive ahead of time were astronomically small. They're roughly on par with the chances of you winning Powerball. But after the election takes place and we see how much the gap was, we actually know for a fact that no vote was decisive. And there's a sense in which if a vote is going to be very close, it's going to be decided by the courts anyway. So there is some debate in poli-sci about what's the probability a vote will be decisive, but in general, people think it's vanishingly small, roughly on the order of winning Powerball or some major lottery multiple times in a row.
Well, it sounds, and you can tell me if this is an incorrect characterization, but it sounds like you're against equality. Is that the case?
Well, if you give everyone an equal vote, that's one way of making them equal, but everyone's for equality. They're just for equality in different ways. So there's a question of should we regard this as the particular way of making people equal? And is there any particular reason to think that one vote, one person is the way that we signal that everyone has sort of equal status in society? So consider I'm not allowed to practice plumbing. I don't have a plumbing license. I can't just get one. If I were to charge someone for fixing their faucet, I could get in trouble with that from my own government. But no one thinks of the fact that we separate people into plumbers and non-plumbers, people who are licensed to engage in plumbing and people who aren't, somehow insults the dignity of everyone else. But for various reasons, we do imbue the right to vote with all of this status. We make the right to vote sort of a public marker that you're a true and equal member of society. So my way of thinking about this is like as follows. If democracy turns out to be the best form of government, then imbuing the right to vote with all this symbolic power is a great thing. If, on the other hand, it turns out to be a subpar form of government and there are better forms of government, then we should probably revise the symbolism that we attach to the right to vote, and we should regard it as no more important than, say, a plumbing license.
Here's a quote from your book. Decline in political engagement is a good start, you say, but we still have a long way to go. We should hope for even less participation, not more. Ideally, politics would occupy only a small portion of the average person's attention. Most people, ideally, would not worry about politics at all. Why would that give us a better world?
So there's a number of reasons. I think it's because we're bad at politics and politics is bad for us. When I say that we're bad at politics, what I mean is that when you examine what typical voters know or typical citizens know in the US and Canada and Germany and other Western democracies, you find that the overall majority of them are either ignorant or worse than ignorant. They're systematically misinformed about the most basic facts. And as a result, when they participate, they tend to push for policies that are bad and ineffective or counterproductive rather than effective and helpful. So that's one problem. But the other problem, I think, is a problem with character. It just turns out that what happens with politics is that we become incredibly tribalistic. We use our political beliefs as a marker of our identities. We tend to form tribes around what political beliefs we have, and we tend to think people on the other side are evil and stupid. And it makes us angry and nasty and unkind towards each other. There's a large field called political psychology that's been studying how politics affects our behavior for about 60 years now, and the results are just incredibly depressing. Politics can turn nice people into jerks.
Well, let me pick up on a couple of words you used there. Systematically misinformed. That's how you've described us. If that's the case, shouldn't the accent then be on making us systematically informed rather than throwing out the baby with the bathwater?
If we could, that would be the better thing. But the problem is the incentives are all wrong. So most people, when they hear about, when we study levels of education and what voters know, they find it very depressing, and it's clear that voters know hardly anything. So they think, this just shows that we need to have better education systems. But the problem is that people do, in fact, get the information they need to be good voters through, say, the K through 12 system, and they forget it all. And the reason they forget it all is because of the incentives. You remember information if the information is interesting or useful to you. Most people don't find politics interesting, and because your individual vote is not likely to be decisive, it's not useful for you either. You can afford to be ignorant about politics. You can afford to indulge irrational beliefs about politics. And so, in fact, most people end up doing that. Giving people more education won't fix the problem because the incentives are wrong.
I do have to challenge one thing you just said, which is most people don't find politics interesting. The ratings were off the charts for your election just passed, the American election for the past year. Seems to me lots of people found that election and your politics awfully bloody interesting, no?
Well, yeah, but think about what they found interesting. They found interesting that we have a strange-looking celebrity with weird golden hair who mouths off unpleasant things and is constantly giving the finger to various kinds of groups. And it's a little bit like they're interested in the way that they're interested in a reality show, and incidentally, he was a reality show star. What they're not interested in are questions that actually matter. So Trump was making claims about are Mexican immigrants, or illegal Mexican immigrants, unusually likely to commit crime. Hardly anyone was actually looking into the statistics about that. They weren't looking into, say, the economics of trade. They weren't looking into the policy issues that were actually being debated. Instead, it was almost entirely about superficial things, about the way people talk, the attitudes that they express, and whom they were making angry. So they're interested in the past election because it was unfortunately quite a bit like a Keeping Up with the Kardashians show. They weren't interested in the actual policy matters.
You have divided, and let's get into the book here, you have divided the American electorate up into basically three different groups, whom you refer to as hobbits, hooligans, and Vulcans. You want to just briefly take us through all three?
Sure. So if you've seen the Lord of the Rings movies or if you've read the books, you know that hobbits are a race of people that don't really care much about the outside world. They're not interested in adventure and so on. They just want to kind of lead their lives, smoke their pipes, eat breakfast and their second breakfasts and their elevensies. And the kind of analog in politics would be a citizen who doesn't really have strong or fixed political opinions, doesn't really have many opinions at all, doesn't have a coherent ideology, doesn't really know much about politics, doesn't participate, just doesn't find it interesting. And so in the United States, I'd say the typical non-voter would be a hobbit so described. Non-voters typically have very low levels of information, and they just don't care very much. If you've ever been to a football/soccer match in a country that actually cares about it, you'll see that people are heavily invested in sports, and we call them soccer hooligans or football hooligans. And hooligans, sports hooligans, often know an incredible amount about their sport, but they're also tribalistic. They're antagonistic towards members of the other team. I once went to a football game in Brazil, and the concierge of my hotel told us to wear certain colors to make sure we didn't get into fights with people on the other side. And he was right, because we saw literal violence and cops beating people up and people fighting each other outside the stadium, which is something I've never seen in an American sporting event. So hooligans, they know a lot about their sport, but they're also incredibly biased as well. When they see a play taking place, they're going to think the call should always go in their favor and never go against the other side. So the political analog of that would be someone who cares a lot about politics, but for them, their political ideology forms part of their beliefs. Like I'm a proud Democrat and I only befriend other Democrats, or I'm a proud member of the Conservative Party and I'm only friends with other conservatives and I hate people that are, part of any other party. They're biased in that they only look for information that confirms their pre-existing beliefs. They ignore and evade and disregard evidence that goes against their beliefs. And they're just kind of angry about it. And so that would be really the other half of, say, voters in the U.S. or the other half of people in Canada. The typical voter in Canada, the typical voter in the United States would be a hooligan so described. Vulcans are supposed to be ideally rational, disinterested people that don't have loyalty to their beliefs, that are willing to give up their beliefs when new evidence comes in. And I bring them up not because I think there really are any Vulcans, so some people are more Vulcan-like than others, but just because a lot of democratic theory, a lot of the philosophy that's supposed to defend democracy presupposes that people act like Vulcans, and they don't. In fact, what democracy is the rule of hobbits and hooligans.
Well, okay, you can't see me, but I'm going to give you the Vulcan salute right now because I'm a Vulcan, I can tell you that, and I presume you are too?
Well, I'd like to think that I'm more Vulcan-like than many other people. I try to do certain things to improve my Vulcan behavior. I spend a lot of time reading things that I disagree with and thinking about things I disagree with. I try to articulate the ideas of the other side as fairly as possible, but you know, at the end of the day, I'm sure that I'm biased in various ways, and that's how it goes.
Well, I want to throw the famous William F. Buckley quote back at you because, you know, to your point that people who don't follow this stuff carefully enough really can't make good decisions, and therefore we get bad government. You know, he did famously say that he'd rather be ruled by the first 2,000 names in the Boston phone book than by the combined faculties of Harvard and MIT. And by that, I assume he meant, partly, that the public has a great sense of their gut is very good. They may not know the ins and outs of every single policy, but they have a good sense and a good gut check about, you know, who's for them. And Buckley appreciated that and honored that. Do you not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess not really. I mean, I might very well pick the first 2,000 people in the Boston phone book over the Harvard faculty just because I'm pretty suspicious about letting people in the English departments rule anyone, to be honest. But I'd probably take the Harvard economics department over the first 2,000 people in the Boston phone book. So we can study how well people's guts work, and here's what we find. They're heavily influenced by things like, did their sports team lose? How has the weather been? They punish politicians for having bad weather. They punish politicians for things like, you know, their favorite sports team losing. They're not really good at assessing what the general facts are. If we ask them, what's going on in your country? Can you tell us at all, within 5 percentage points, what's the unemployment rate? Can you tell us roughly how much money is spent on different kinds of things? Can you name some of the policies that were implemented in the past couple years? Do you even know who your Congress people are or your members of parliament? Do you know which party controls parliament or which party controls Congress? Most people who vote can't answer those questions, let alone the people who stay home. I think their guts are mostly going with untutored prejudices. And so one way of thinking about that is Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations to refute an economic philosophy called mercantilism. He decisively refuted it, and then after he decisively refuted it, generations of economists have laid on even stronger, more powerful refutations. But then when we go to investigate what the average American thinks about economics, they believe the thing that was refuted over 200 years ago. They're all mercantilists. And it's because of untutored prejudices they have about how the economy works. So, no, I don't really trust people's guts very much, to be honest.
Okay, in which case, I can imagine people watching this are saying, fine, you don't like things the way they are. What have you got that's a better idea? And you have advanced something that you call epistocracy as opposed to democracy. Tell us what that is.
Good. So epistocratic systems are systems in which, by law, political power is to some degree apportioned according to objective knowledge. So there's a variety of different kinds, and one of the things I talk about in the book is what the different sorts are and whether we might try to investigate them and see whether some could work better. So one type of system would be something where, say, the philosopher and economist John Stuart Mill advocated, called plural voting, where everyone gets one vote, but if you, say, acquire certain credentials that you can pass a test of basic knowledge, you might get an additional vote. You could have a system in which you only acquire the right to vote if you can pass sort of a voter licenses exam. So by default, no one gets the right to vote, but you can acquire one through certain rules. You could have a system in which panels of experts have more power to veto democratic legislation, but then, say, Parliament could overturn that if they have a sufficient supermajority. Another system that's advocated by the Mexican philosopher Claudio Lopez Guerra is a system in which you randomly select about 20,000 people. They and only they are empowered to vote, but they acquire the right to vote only if they first go through some sort of competence building exercise. And finally, there's something I like called I call government by simulated oracle. And in that system, what happens is you allow everyone to vote, but when they vote, they don't simply put down their policy preferences or vote for a candidate. They also take a quiz of basic political knowledge, and at the same time, they put down their demographic information, what race they are, what gender they are, how much, their income, and other things that might affect, non-cognitive factors that might affect their policy preferences. And when we get all that data together, we can then statistically simulate what would the voting public want if it were fully informed while controlling for whatever effect demographic factors have on their beliefs. And what happens in the government by simulated oracle is you do what the informed public would want rather than what the uninformed public in fact wants.
And if we did things this way, what difference would it make? How would things turn out differently from the way it is now?
Yeah, so because we have so much data on voter beliefs and so on, we can actually look at how information affects policy preferences while controlling for people's background demographics. And what we find, and this is a surprising result, it's not guaranteed by any of these kind of methods of studying this, is that high information people, regardless of their background political party, tend to converge on one set of beliefs, and low information people tend to have the opposite set of beliefs. So for example, high information people in both, say, the right and left-wing party in the United States are pro-immigration, they're pro-trade, they are less punitive about crime and they want criminal justice reform. They're pro-gay rights. Even if they think abortion is wrong, they still want it to be legal because they think criminalizing it doesn't work. They have nuanced views about welfare policy and about the environmental policy. And they're in favor of diplomatic interventions, but they're not very pugilistic when it comes to war. On the other hand, if you are low information in the United States, then you have almost the exact opposite set of policy preferences. And then you can look and see, well, what about the policy preferences that actual politicians are pushing in the U.S.? And what you find is that the median voter and the median sort of policy platform that you see among politicians more closely corresponds to what low information people want than what high information people want. And keep in mind, this is checking for the effects of demographics. So we can say, with a high degree of certainty, that it's not because you're high income or because you're white that you favor free trade. It's because you're high information.
Okay, again, I want to play this forward a little bit so that let's say that epistocracy takes hold, and let's say that the people that this epistocracy elects are now in place to make decisions. How would the decisions be different from what's happening today?
I think we would just have better quality policies. So, for example, take immigration. When we ask economists how to think about immigration, they say immigration is a really good thing. It's good for the economy. It's good for the people that live here. In fact, there's a nice estimate. There's a paper everyone should Google and read called $1 Trillion Bills on the Sidewalk by the economist Michael Clemens. And when economists try to estimate what is the net effect of immigration restrictions around the world, they think it cuts world product in half. Literally, world product right now should be about $218 trillion US dollars, and it's only half of that because immigration restrictions are so inefficient. Right? That's what experts think. And then when we ask lay people, what they think incorrectly is that immigrants cause crime, when in fact immigrants are lower crime than native-born people. They think that immigrants steal jobs, when in fact they don't. They think that immigrants lower wages, when in fact they increase people's wages for almost everybody except for low, unskilled workers with less than a high school diploma, et cetera, et cetera. So I think what we're getting in democracies is a set of subpar, suboptimal, inefficient, destructive policies that make our lives worse, and we just don't notice it because we don't know better.
Would the political parties in an epistocracy be different from those in a democracy?
They might very well be. It might be that we keep the same parties, but they just change their policy platforms. It might be that we have different parties altogether. But the sort of supply side of this is that parties, in order to win, have to run candidates that appeal to voters. So if the average voter who pays any attention at all is going to fail Econ 101 and has certain prejudices and mistakes, they're going to run candidates that appeal to those people. If, on the other hand, the typical voter is actually highly informed, they're going to run candidates that appeal to those people instead. So I think we would have better quality candidates. In an epistocracy, I don't think the U.S. would have anyone like Donald Trump. That just never would happen.
It wouldn't happen because his lack of knowledge on basic things just would disqualify him from getting as far as he's gotten? Is that the idea?
Yeah, I mean, his main policy platforms were anti-immigration and anti-trade, and no economist left or right agrees with him. We just know he's wrong. It's not even an ideological thing. Left-wing economists, right-wing economists, conservatives, libertarian, centrists, they all think he's mistaken. You have to look very far to find someone who actually endorse anything that he says.
I don't have to tell you, you're spitting into a hurricane here with this, because obviously for the last century and a half, your country, and in fact most of the world, has been about enfranchising more people, not disenfranchising more people. How do you hope that this idea will catch on?
Yeah, so I think past movements towards enfranchisement were the right thing to do, in part because we weren't disenfranchising people for good reasons, such as that they were uninformed. We were disenfranchising them as a way of signaling to them that we think that they're inferior. As a matter of fact, the Nazis say used the Star of David to signal that Jews were inferior. It was a public affirmation of their inferiority. In the US and Canada and the UK and elsewhere, we use the right to vote as a public affirmation of people's equality. So we load it with all this symbolic value, and given that we do that, it's important that we extend it to more people. It's arbitrary to disenfranchise somebody because that they're a woman or because they're black. And it would be arbitrary to say use driving licenses that way as well. Imagine if we said, you're not allowed to drive because you're female. That's a really bad reason to forbid someone from driving. On the other hand, we do say things like, well, we're not going to let you drive because you're incompetent at driving, and allowing you to drive imposes too much risk upon innocent bystanders. No one bats an eye at that. Why don't we say the same thing about voting? We're not going to allow you to vote, not because you're inherently inferior, but because when you vote, you're imposing too much risk upon innocent bystanders, and you shouldn't have the right to harm other people through your political actions.
But you're
that said,
I'm sorry, I was just going to say, but the results of the decisions are felt just as forcefully, whether you get a chance to vote or whether you don't get a chance to vote. So how is it not ultimately unfair against those who don't meet your test for them not to be able to vote?
Yeah, I like what the British philosopher Ben Saunders says about this. In a democracy, you have so little political power that fighting over equal voting rights is not so much like fighting over equal slices of a cake as it is like fighting over crumbs. So I voted in the last election. It had no effect. It never will. Even though I vote in certain ways, it has had no effect and never will have any effect on what policies are implemented. If I'd voted the opposite way, it would have had no effect. If I'd stayed home, it would have had no effect. Every single one of us in a democracy is in a situation where what happens is a result of everyone else's actions, and our own actions make no difference. That said, if you really do care about fairness, if what you care about is giving everyone an equal chance, a real equal chance, you shouldn't be a Democrat in the first place. Because what happens in a democracy is you have minorities that never get their way. In fact, even though they're enfranchised, it doesn't matter that they're enfranchised because they'll never get their way. All that matters is what the majority wants. So what a lot of philosophers say is if you care about fairness, then what you want are random-based systems. You might say flip a coin and that will decide policy, or perhaps do the following. Allow everyone to say vote for who the president will be, but then rather than letting that determine the president, you assign probabilities to each candidate based upon the number of votes they receive, and then use a random number generator to pick a candidate. And that's actually a more fair system because in that system, persistent minorities actually have a chance of getting their way. So I think fairness doesn't get you to democracy. And most people, when you bring up this idea of sortition or random-based mechanisms, they'll say, sure, that's more fair, but I don't like it because it will lead to worse policy, which suggests that they're with me in agreeing that fairness is just one of many values to be considered here. We
got a couple of minutes left here, and I want to touch on two more things. Is there any jurisdiction that you know of anywhere in the world that is doing something similar to what you're advancing here tonight?
I tried looking into that, and it's not really clear there is. There was a certain point in British history where they were giving extra votes to people who graduated from a certain number of universities, and that long has passed, and it didn't really have much of an effect because it was such a small thing anyway. It's probably illegal in most states, most countries around the world, and perhaps the best analog of this that could be easily implemented in the short term would be something like, imagine that there's a voter achievement day. The Canadian government announces a week before the next federal election that there's going to be a quiz, and if you show up and you get an 80% on the quiz or higher, then you get, say, a $500 tax credit. We basically pay people to be informed. That's something you could do. It might incentivize people to be a little bit better informed, but in a sense, this is a long way off from anyone actually trying to do this.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, we're having you on the program, and I hope you agree that I've sort of respectfully asked questions, and because you're a professor at Georgetown University and obviously worthy of respect and having your ideas analyzed appropriately. But you do have to know that, you're asking for a huge case of, this can be demonized so easily by so many people who could accuse you of a million different sins here. How do you even get to square one with this idea?
Yeah, I think you just have to kind of state it calmly and openly and try to respond as cleanly as you can to the criticism. So one of the things I do in the book and in follow-up articles is to say, here are the major objections to my position. I try to articulate them as best I can. I think I often articulate them more strongly than the other side does and just try to respond to them in a fair way. But to be honest, and this might sound like a funny thing to say, but given what I say in the beginning of the book about how people are political hooligans, you can't reasonably expect people to just listen to you and then say, oh, that's a good point, I'm going to reconsider it. It's kind of rare for people to do that, and that's not just because of talking about democracy. That could be about anything. If I'm defending free trade and you're an anti-free trade person, then what I should expect is that you demonize me. Demonization is the most common thing people do in politics. If you care about politics, you demonize the other side, and if you don't demonize the other side, it's because you don't care about politics.
Well, from one Vulcan to another, let me say live long and prosper, and it's been a pleasure having you on TVO tonight.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
That's Jason Brennan, Associate Professor of Strategy, Economics, Ethics, and Public Policy at the McDonough School of Business at Georgetown University. He's the author of Against Democracy. Thanks, Professor Brennan.
Thank you.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.